Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sahar and you're watching Rethink with Sahar. So, in this program, in this show, we try to rethink things. We try to uh, rethink about what life is or what we are doing, and rethink in general about technology, uh, um, about emotions and where we are going and all that. So today we have a very wonderful guest with us, Jim Paul. Jim,
Thank you very much for having me, Sahar. I'm looking
welcome.
forward to our talk.
Mhm. And Jim is the writer of Shaking Up the World. So he's already shaking up the world. He's 90, over 90, 91, I guess.
91, yeah.
Yeah, 91. And look, he looks so young. And it's not about looking young, it's about feeling young. He has lived his life as a Navy officer. He was uh, he was there in the class of 1957. He was a Naval Academy in the class of 1957. And so he is, uh, let me set up if I don't know if give me a second. So whatever. So he was there and he had variety of experiences which he shared in his book Shaking Up the World. So welcome, Jim. And I should be uh, I should not be having any questions why you wrote that book because it is so interesting, so full of stories. It's 81 stories written by more than 50 authors. And one of the reviewers of the book says it's history at eye level. And that's the beauty of it. Jim, tell us something about that book. First of all, tell us something about yourself and how you're doing today.
Well, I'm doing great today.
Ah,
And I think that this book is not only educational, but
uh-huh.
it's entertaining, and I find it very inspiring. So if anyone reads this book, they're going to enjoy it. They're going to be educated, and they're going to be inspired by the people that are in this book. It's unbelievable because I
Wow.
think there's so many stories, and people ended up doing so many different things that as a young person, you can say, look at this group. They started out with 1,160 that started in June of 1953, and we
Hmm.
graduated 848.
Oh,
And now there are about 250 of us that are still alive. But
wow.
the thing is, when you look at what's happened over these years, they
Hmm.
have done so many different things and been involved in so many in events. And the book
Hmm.
is not a group of biographies, which are very boring. This
Hmm.
book is about specific events, and to be in this book had to be special in some way because we had a lot of other stories that did not were not adequate for the book, and so they didn't measure up, and we didn't put them in the book. But
Okay.
I think there are a lot of stories in here that would be of interest to people,
Mhm.
and I think they would enjoy reading them.
Wow. I bet they will, I am sure. Because these are the real life stories. And the way you were telling me the story of that janitor, assistant janitor who did not have a future, and how he rose up to be an admiral in Navy. So, would you like to share that with us?
Yeah, that's a it's a fairy tale.
Uh
Here
huh.
is a young man by the name of Bruce DeMars,
Hmm.
and Bruce was an assistant janitor at a bank in
Okay.
Chicago. He came
Okay.
from a very poor neighborhood. He
Mm.
had no future at all. and but the bankers took a liking to him and got him an Annapolis uh, entry, and he graduated from Annapolis, went into the submarine force, became a nuclear engineer,
Wow.
and eventually was promoted to a four-star admiral. He was
Wow.
he was the
Mm.
director of the nuclear propulsion plants in the Navy. He took Rickover's
Beautiful.
place, if you know that name.
Yeah. Am I
Now
right?
I will tell you this: when people wrote the stories,
Uh-huh.
I would, after I got through editing it, I would send it back to them to let them look at it and make sure all the facts that I had in it were correct, and let them
Uh-huh.
correct it any way they wanted to.
Mhm.
Well, in Bruce's case, I didn't hear back from him. So I kept sending
Mhm.
notes. Bruce, have you had a chance to read your story yet? Have you
Mhm.
read it yet? I didn't hear anything, but eventually I got a phone call from his son.
Okay.
And his son said, Jimmy, he said, Daddy has not been doing well lately. He
Oh.
said, but I read the book to him, I read the story to him,
Mhm.
and he looked up at me from the bed and he said, I want to buy that book.
He didn't remember himself.
And but unfortunately, he died a couple of weeks after
Oh,
that.
that's sad.
But Bruce was accomplished a lot, and someone that had no future but rose to the very top. And I
Mhm.
call that my fairy tale. I love that story. I feel so good about it. And he
Mhm.
was such a great man too.
Yeah. That's a
Yeah,
life
yeah,
well lived.
yeah,
From humble beginnings to being a nuclear engineer and the director and a four-star naval admiral.
yeah.
Oh wow, that's a story of dreams coming true. And you put it well. It was a fairy tale. So are all the stories so happy, or there are
Um, I think one of the happiest stories I have is I had the book signing last year, and I received a telephone call from a lady that lived in Florida, and
oh.
the book signing was going to be in Georgia.
Mhm.
And she said, Jimmy, I bought a copy of the book, bought a book. He said, I'd like to bring it up. Would you sign it for me? And I said, yes, certainly. And
Mhm.
so she came up, and the room was full of people. But eventually, she came in and sat in a chair, and we started talking.
Mhm.
And her name was Karen Stevens. And she said,
Okay.
I'd like you to dedicate this book to my son. His name is Spencer.
Hi.
So I wrote a note in the book to Spencer Stevens, and she said, I want him to read this. He's going to Annapolis next week.
Wow.
That's a great,
Mhm.
I love that story.
That's
And now
beautiful.
he just finished his first year there.
Uh-huh.
He's a big kid. He's 6'4", weighs
Mhm.
220 pounds. He's a
Mhm.
left-handed pitcher, and he was pitched a lot of ball as his first year there in Annapolis. So
Okay.
it's worked out really well for him. I love that story. That's one of my favorites.
Wow. Wow. It's a beautiful story. Beautiful
Yeah.
story. And so 1959, 53. So that was a time when the world was coming out of the World War.
Yes.
And does any one of your stories relate to World War II? Because
Yes.
if you lived at that time.
A number of them, but I will tell you. I will start off with the children
Okay.
first. I
Mm-hmm.
had the wife, my roommate's wife
Uh-huh.
was 4 years old in Pearl Harbor. Her
Wow.
father was on a ship that was at sea that was with Halsey's carriers. They were not in
Mhm.
port when the Japanese attacked,
Oh.
and and they lived about a mile from the harbor where the bombs were coming down.
Mm-hmm.
So they were very much in danger because they were close to the war zone there. But the next door neighbors
Mm-hmm.
picked them up in the car and they
Oh,
drove to a tunnel where they could be safe underground.
wow.
And it turned out that their neighbors were Japanese.
Oh,
So they were rescued by the Japanese. So that
yes.
was her father came home just after the raid and the ship came in. They refueled and they went back to sea, and she didn't see her father again for 4 years.
Oh.
So that her story. Now I had
Mm.
another young man that was 8 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and his father was a graduate of West Point, and he was in the army stationed at the airfield, and
Mm-hmm.
their house was 2 doors from the airfield that was being bombed.
Okay.
But it was on Sunday morning, if you remember, and
Mm-hmm.
he was standing out at the street waiting for a bus to pick him up to take him to Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
But the Japanese planes were strafing the airport, and he
Mm-hmm.
said the empty cartridges were falling in the street. And
Okay.
like any little boy, he walked around, started picking them up, putting them in his pocket.
Mm-hmm.
Well, his father came home and grabbed him and took him in the house and put he and his mother under a table where they'd be safe. And then when there was just a little bit of a slack, he put them in a
Okay.
car and they drove them to an elementary school that was about 8 miles away, so they'd be far enough away from the harbor. But he didn't see his father again for 4 years, and they went back to live with the grandparents in Oklahoma until the war was over. But his story
Oh.
was an odyssey because he was continuously asked to tell his story over and over again all his life. And
Oh.
it after the war, his father was stationed in Japan as part of the occupation force,
Uh-huh.
and he actually, because his father was West Pointer, and MacArthur was in charge of the occupation there, that MacArthur was at their house quite often. So he actually got to know MacArthur. So
Uh-huh.
he had an elaborate story to tell from Pearl Harbor right on up to through the Korean War, really.
Wow.
So that was
These
a good friend of mine, Tom Mornane.
these are the life experiences that I mean, these are life and death situations, and for something, nobody's responsible.
Yes.
Don't you think war is like? Uh, I remember that poem. That's a famous writer, poet. I don't remember his name now. So he says the soldier is talking to the other soldier. He's saying, I don't know who you are, or you don't know who I am. We haven't done anything wrong to each other. And but the moment you will move, or the moment I move, we are going to shoot each other dead. So that's for something, people are killing each other for something that no one even knows what it is. and and people are dying, not only the soldiers, the innocent people are dying. And oh my god, what are your thoughts on war? Because you were in the armed forces, so
Well,
how do you look at the war?
well, go back to the Civil War where the
Hmm.
North was fighting the South in America. Okay, we
Hmm.
lost over 600,000 Americans in that war. The
Yeah.
most we ever lost in any war was killing
Mhm.
one another. That some
Yeah,
were brothers, that was fighting brothers. And some
exactly.
went with the North and some went with the South. That's
Yeah.
the way it was. And there were, if you look at the original officers of Grant and Robert E. Lee, who were the primary generals in the war, they
Hmm.
were at the military academy at one time or another. I don't know if it was the same time or not. But then you've got officers that from West Point that went to the north and some went to the south. And then you've got people off the farm, and like I
Hmm.
said, some are brothers and fighting brothers, and it doesn't make any sense. But that's, I don't know what you call that. Uh, it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible to think about. Any war is horrible.
It's horrible.
And it's some wars are gradual and just start, but you wonder about, why did the Japanese attack China?
Yeah.
uh, I don't know why. I mean, we could talk about that one a little bit, but there's you start looking 100 years to 200 years after a war. Wars go all the way back, as far back as we can remember or we studied in school. There always have been wars,
Mhm.
and when you get separated from them and you look at them, you say why? Because
Why?
eventually it's over, right? And
Yeah.
and if you look at our war with Vietnam, uh, I know we lived in Southern California, and we had a lot of Vietnamese people that lived in Southern
Mhm.
California, and
Mhm.
they did exceptionally well in our school, and they became a very important part of Southern California, and more so than maybe anywhere else in the country. But
Mhm.
but they were basically from South Vietnam. But now we're dealing with all of Vietnam because it's now one country instead of North and South.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We have a North and South Korea, and why do we have that? I don't know. They're common people, but they've
One
got a
of
fence between their two countries, and I don't know how you solve that. Uh,
yeah. It's
but
it's
they're different. We get differences, and even as kids, we get into fist fights because we disagree over something. So I don't know. Maybe is it something that's innate? Is that something that we're born with, that we want to disagree and we're going to fight over it, or we're going to debate over it, or we're going to argue, or what?
yeah. Debating and arguing is okay, but killing each other is not. And be
Yeah,
it in a military uniform, be it in a uniform of any kind, or be it on the streets. But when we are in the uniform, we are justified by the law.
yeah.
But I do not know if ethics and moral law are one with the political law or the law of a land. So,
Well, if you go back in history and you look at the Roman Empire, I mean, they started from a very small country and they conquered almost the whole European war, and even in England, they went all the way to England and to the British Isles. And but why? Why did they do that? I mean, a lot of people got killed as a result of that. But
uh,
they just people want more, and I guess that's part of it. So we're going to get more, and we're going to go take it any way we can.
yeah,
I don't quite understand all of it, but
actually, no one understands. We
I
are just
don't.
trying to understand.
Yeah,
Everybody is. Uh, Wars have been there since the beginning of civilization. I think it's more about the material possessions than about anything else.
that's
So
yeah, that's part of it. You've
yeah,
got something I want, I'm going to take it,
yeah,
right? You're
exactly.
going to you're going to give it to me, even if you give it to me, I'm still going to take it.
Yeah, that's right. And I want to talk to my viewers also at this time who are watching. If you have any questions, if you want to listen to any stories from Jim, you can send messages or you can join us on in the discussion that the little discussion that we are having about big issues. So we are not trying to point out to any one person or to one nation or anything. We are talking in general of the concepts that we are discussing at this time. So if you want to and uh, contribute to the discussion, please do so. And I will send you an invite link where you can, I will post an invite link where you can click and you can you can share your s- stories with us. So here is the I have just posted the link. I don't know if you were able to see it or not, but if you are not, please let me know so that we can fix the issue. So let me just see if there is something. No, I don't think some of you have been able to see it. Let me fix it. And meanwhile, we'll have another story from Jim. Jim, please.
Okay, let me tell you my favorite story.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of stories in this book. There are probably four or five that would make good movies and
Oh,
or good television shows.
I bet.
But but my
Yeah.
favorite story is about George Phillips. George
Okay.
was the skipper of a seagoing tugboat. I
Uh-huh.
think most people know what a tugboat is. Tugboats move barges and ships and fuel lines and a lot of things around.
Mm-hmm.
And tugboats generally have very experienced people on board because it's a very hazardous job. And
Hmm.
George had two chief warrant officers, one in charge of the engineering spaces below, and then
Okay.
one that did the top side with all the handling of the lines and the things. And
Uh-huh.
his name was Bosun Beans.
Oh.
And they got an assignment to go to Philadelphia to pick up a destroyer, which is a fairly good sized ship, and tow
Mm-hmm.
it around Florida to Texas.
Okay.
So they got to Philadelphia, got hooked up, got out into the Arctic Atlantic Ocean, and had the big destroyer towing it behind them. And they
Mm-hmm.
found out that there was a hurricane that was brewing down off of Florida.
Okay.
So they decided we cannot go down there and get caught in the storm. It would be very, very dangerous with a big
Uh-huh.
destroyer behind us. So they
Huh.
pulled into Fort Everglades, which is now Fort Lauderdale, to get out of the storm. Well, the night before they got in, George came down with a severe abdominal pains. And the doctor on board, who was a chief petty officer, hospital corpsman, told him that you have appendicitis. And when we get in, you're going to have to go to the hospital immediately. So when they got in and got tied up, everything was secure. The ambulance was up on the dock, and the paramedics came down and loaded him up. So there goes the commanding officer up the deck, up the pier, and into the ambulance, and on the way to the hospital. So when he gets to the hospital, they found out that it was not appendicitis, it was gastroenteritis, and they gave him some treatment and they let him come back to the boat the next morning. So when he got to the boat, everybody's standing there waiting for him. And they said, Skipper, we're in the best Liberty port in the United States, close to Miami here, but none of us have any money. We haven't been paid for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But we found out if you take our pay records down to the Coast Guard station in Miami, that they will pay you. You can come back and give us our pay, and we can all go ashore and have a good time while we wait out the storm.
Wow.
And we've arranged for you to have a pickup truck. So George gets in the pickup truck and heads to Miami. So
Wow.
he's going south on
Mm-hmm.
Highway A1A, which has the ocean on one side and strip malls on the other.
Hmm.
So at one point, a car pulled out of one of the strip centers without watching where they were going. And George had to swerve to the left to avoid T-boning him, hitting him broadside. And he scraped all the way down the side of the car that was on the inside lane.
Oh.
So they pulled off the road. The other driver was just mad as he could be
Hmm.
because he said, "You just ruined my new car." And
Ah.
he said, "I called the police," and the police came and they gave George a ticket.
Oh.
and they said, I'm taking your driver's license because you're in the Navy. We can't depend that you show up in court. He said, but if you show up at court at 2 o'clock this afternoon, we'll
Hmm.
give you your driver's license back.
Okay.
So at 2 o'clock, George goes to the court. And the George is a very ornery cuss. He was very tough. He spoke both English and Spanish because a lot of the cases in Miami were Hispanic. And
Mhm.
and so when the clerk called George's name, George stood up and he read the charges against him. And the judge said, how do you plead? And George said, not guilty. And the judge says, bang, $25. And George says, let me explain. And George, and he, bang, $25. And
Okay.
George said, and he said, bailiff, take him away. So the
Uh,
bailiff takes him by the arm and locks him up. So now the
oh,
commanding officer is locked up in jail.
wow.
So he said there's a telephone on the wall and he had some loose change in his pocket.
Uh,
So he called a boat
huh.
and he talked to the executive officer. He said, bring $25 down here. They got me locked up in jail. And so the executive officer says, I don't have $25. He said, well, pass the hat. There's got to be $25 on the boat.
Hmm.
So a couple hours later, a group of them showed up.
Hmm.
And George looked and the bosun, he said, why are you here? You're all dressed up in blues. It looks like you're ready for inspection. He said,
Huh.
well, sir, he said, I've never had to bail the captain out of jail before. I wanted to be here and see this. And so he said they were talking out during the hall. And about that time, the judge came out of the courtroom
Mhm.
and he saw the group talking down there. And all of a
Hmm.
sudden, he and Bosun Bean started looking at each other. And
Hmm.
all of a sudden, they ran together and started hugging and jumping up and down. And it turned out
Huh.
that they had been best friends in New Jersey and
Wow.
had joined the Navy. And they were
Oh,
at Pearl Harbor, and a bomb hit and blew both of them over the side. And
oh,
each thought the other was dead until
my,
that moment.
wow.
So at that point, the judge said $5 court costs. So they paid the $5, and George went back to the tugboat. When he
Oh.
got to his cabin on there, he got on the phone. He called his wife.
Mhm.
He said, honey, sit down. I have something to tell you.
Mhm.
In the last 2 days, I've
Hmm.
been in and out of the hospital and in and out of jail. That's all I have to say.
Strange and funny things happen. But this was a good discovery that uh, they thought that they are not, they were not alive for each other, and then they discovered that. Uh, what a beautiful discovery!
Oh, absolutely. It was like, I mean, it was two best friends that were they both thought the other was dead until
Yeah,
that moment. And then they were just reconnected and they were so excited because they had done everything together. They played sports together and they just were just best friends for many, many years. And now they were reconnected. And that was kind of a fun story. That's my
exactly.
favorite story. I love that one.
That beautiful story of reunion and life, uh, overcoming everything negative, and
Yeah.
that's amazing. So, after having lived through all these wars and beautiful experiences as well, good and bad, all of all sorts, and I would like to ask you one thing. Uh, how was life?
Life. I think, we were born in the Depression. I was born in 1933.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my mother, we lived out in the country about 10 miles, and my
Mm-hmm.
mother had to flag the train down to go to town to buy groceries. We didn't have a car. And when
Oh.
she came back, she had to get on another train to come back home.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very, very tough in the Depression. People didn't have money. We really, people struggled to get food on the table. And
Mhm.
it was a very large amount of the population. We were basically, everybody was poor.
Yes.
But we moved to town and so that I could go to school because the school buses didn't run out that far.
Hmm.
So, and then we went through World War II,
Hmm.
and it was difficult because it seemed like every man in town went to war. Uh, and as children, it was different for us because they put a shipyard. We built Liberty ships in my town,
Hmm.
and we went from about 10 or 12,000 population to 60, 70,000 overnight. And they had
Hmm.
built apartments in every vacant lot in town. People were sleeping in the cars or commuting from 60, 70 miles away for
Wow.
work or sleeping in an extra bed. Usually two people were living in a bed that somebody's renting to them.
Hmm.
It was a very difficult time. Our school system had to go to two sessions, a morning session and an afternoon session. So the friends that you played with normally were a different session than you, so you were missing your friends.
Hmm.
And there were so many sacrifices because sometimes people even had cars they couldn't buy tires for their car because they were rationed and they had to put car on blocks until the
Wow.
war was over. So you couldn't buy gasoline because except for very small amounts, you had ration tickets and you had to
Hmm.
turn those in and you weren't allowed to buy so many gallons of gasoline. Things were
Hmm.
rationed. You go to the grocery store, there was no flour, there was no sugar, and you had to wait until a truckload came in, and you needed somebody to tell you that they've got sugar at the store. You jumped in the car and run down to get some. But we lived on a lot of game. My father did a lot of hunting,
Hmm.
and uncles did. So we got along that way, and people farmed, and shared their crops with one another.
Hmm.
So I'll just talk about that phase of my life, which was very young. And I basically worked from the time I was about 8 years old. I was 8 years
Wow.
old. I swept out cars and cleaned windshields. I had to stand on a wooden box to reach the windshield, and I'd get a nickel or a dime tip, and I'd make $2 or $3 a week is what I made then. But and I did a lot of different jobs growing up. But it was I've had a wonderful life. I can't think of anything. There are a couple of things I wish I could have done, but I couldn't do them because of where I lived and what we did. But the one thing that I've always loved to do, my
Hmm.
first passion in life was fishing. And
Wow.
I've fished all over the world. I love to fish, and in fact, I went fishing this morning for 2 hours.
Great.
I can't really do fancy kind of fishing, but my caretaker drives me over to a farm pond, and I can roll my walker out and sit in a chair and fish for a couple hours and catch a few bass. But I put them all back. I don't keep anything,
Hmm.
and so at least I get to hold the fishing rod in my
That's
hands.
beautiful. You don't keep anything, you put them back in. Wow. That's the real sportsmanship.
Yeah,
And thank you so much, Jim. You shared so much of your life with us today. And thank you for coming here. And hopefully, and guys, if you liked his stories, you can have more of his stories in his book. And you can read them. You can buy it from Amazon. And the book is Shaking Up the World: Stories of the Naval Academy Class of 1957, and by James D. Paulk. And so do read this book and be there, and we will meet again next Saturday at 11 a.m. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jim.
you bet. Thank you.